Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A couple of first responders in Lethbridge are fighting back against mandatory vaccinations and had a warning letter sent to the AHS. Alberta's Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Deena Hinshaw, made a public apology. We will explain why. And Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says even if you're double vaxxed, you will still have to be tested once you cross the border from the U.S. back into Canada.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Calgary police say 3 men were injured early this morning in a series of random attacks. Police say one occurred at a C train station downtown just after 3 a.m. after a man called for help saying he was slashed by a machete. He was taken to hospital in serious condition. Around a half hour later, another man was found unconscious at a bus shelter on 6th Avenue and 1st Street Southwest. The nature of his injuries were not provided, and he was taken to hospital in life-threatening condition. Then another man was found on 6th Avenue Southwest who was knocked unconscious. He suffered minor injuries and was not taken to hospital. The ages of the victims were not released. Police ask for anyone with information on the attacks to call Crime Stoppers right away. A group called Fight for the Frontline is challenging Alberta Health Services on their decision to implement mandatory vaccinations for frontline workers. As Micah Quinn explains now, 2 local first responders in our city are fighting back against AHS, and their group has sent a warning letter to the head of AHS, Dr. Verna Yu, demanding that they be heard.
Brian Follett and Matthew Halutnicek are members of the group called Fight for the Frontline. Follett has been a firefighter for 26 years, and Halutnicek has been with the Lethbridge Fire Department for 3 years and EMS for 7. The group represents Alberta firefighters, paramedics, and first responders. This also includes administrative staff, dispatchers, and others who are facing loss of employment because they are choosing to not receive the COVID vaccine.
We are basically representing all AHS workers that are on the front lines, from anything from a janitor to an RN, but it was started by paramedic firefighters.
Follett says he was injured on the job and he was diagnosed with a condition called rhabdomyolysis, which results from the death of muscle fibers and release of their contents into the bloodstream. He says he wants to keep his choice to not get vaccinated right now.
So that's my day-to-day grind, is I get up and I do exercises and physio and walking and stretching and just trying to rebuild my legs so that I can get back to work.
The group is demanding AHS provide a rapid testing option, recognize natural immunity, and allow for exemptions under the Alberta Human Rights Act. On Thursday afternoon, Dr. Verna Yu stated that she received the letter from the group, but that the letter didn't specifically mention who they were representing.
As you know, we don't employ firefighters. There are some contracted providers who have a combined firefighters EMS background that might be employed and may have to comply with the vaccination policy, but right now we just don't have any indication how relevant it is for Alberta Health Services. Dr. Yu went on to say that 750 of her staff are seeking exemptions from vaccine requirements on medical and religious grounds. Bridge City News reached out to AHS for comment regarding the matter, and they sent us a statement saying, quote, "We are approaching the deadline for staff to have received their final dose of the vaccine, and we are confident that the vast majority of our people will be immunized. The numbers are fluctuating hourly, and we hope to have a better idea of just how many employees are immunized later in the week. The deadline does not arrive until Saturday. We continue to engage with our employees and with physicians to answer any questions they may have about the policy or about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines." For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The government of Alberta says it will change how it reports future COVID-19 related deaths of minors. The province originally reported that a 14-year-old died from the virus when family members said the child actually died from stage 4 brain cancer. COVID was a secondary cause. Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Deena Hinshaw, apologized.
The pain of losing a child is terrible enough without having that loss compounded by a public debate about the circumstances. I am sorry if the way that I spoke about that death made your grief worse. Since the start of this pandemic, I have heard from many Albertans, including those who have lost a loved one. I reflect often on the impact that our reporting, measures, and every other element of the pandemic response has on them. When I speak about cases and our reporting process, it is not to diminish the losses whether caused by COVID or anything else. At the same time, we are in a global pandemic. We have an obligation to monitor and report deaths from COVID-19 infection and to be as timely and transparent as possible. In our reporting, we always include all deaths that have COVID as either a primary or secondary cause of death, according to the healthcare teams that were involved in the cases.
There are some within the medical community who question the way the government handled the pandemic. You can include Dr. Dennis Maudry in that conversation. Dr. Maudry implemented Western Canada's first heart and lung transplantation system. He also served on many hospital committees. Dr. Maudry says the Alberta government and Premier Kenney should have put together a more effective strategy, and he says it should have started with doubling ICU capacity.
The solution to handling this problem without having lockdowns was to simply double the ICU capacity. And there was plenty of opportunity to do that, which solves two problems. And one of the problems is to handle any surge from purported COVID-19 patients. The second is to solve the chronic problem that exists within the general healthcare system, and that's access and long waiting lists. So you double the ICU capacity. He could have won on both fronts, but he didn't do it. And that's a failure of leadership, in my opinion.
Catch the full interview with retired surgeon Dr. Dennis Maudry coming up after Business News. The Calgary street preacher who stood in defiance of public health orders during the pandemic has been handed a huge fine. The courts ordered Arthur Pawlowski to pay fines totaling $23,000 plus legal fees to AHS exceeding $20,000 for breaking public health orders. Court of Queen's Bench Justice Adam Germain said Pawlowski showed no remorse for his anti-COVID-19 crusade, even traveling to the United States to champion his cause. The court also handed Pawlowski's brother David a $10,000 fine. The Pawlowskis are also subject to probationary orders that include any public speeches they would make which would be contrary to the majority of scientific opinion that contradicts their own. Health officials in our province are urging Albertans to roll up their sleeves for a different type of jab. It is the start of the flu season, and officials say preventing it will ease the burden on hospitals already under strain from COVID-19. Dr. Dina Henshaw says the province's influenza campaign starts Monday, and people should get their free flu shot right away. Last year, more than 1.65 million doses of flu vaccine were administered around the province. Starting October 25th, all people who are in contact with school buildings within the Holy Spirit Catholic School Division will have to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19 or participate in regular rapid testing. School officials say the only people the rules won't apply to are those who require an accommodation pursuant to protected grounds under the Alberta Human Rights Act. The requirement will apply to staff, visitors, contractors, and volunteers. The regulations will not apply to students. Beginning November 1st, the Lethbridge School Division will require all employees to be fully vaccinated or provide a negative COVID-19 test to enter buildings within the school division. Officials say the vaccination procedures will apply to all employees, substitutes, contractors, volunteers, and practicum students. Students will be exempt, and parents will only be exempt if they are attending a facility for purposes clearly related to their child's education and in a setting where students are not present. Exemptions may also be in place for those with specific medical or human rights accommodations. Monday, millions of Albertans will go to the polls to vote for the next municipal governments. There will be a couple of referendum questions on the ballot, including if we should keep daylight savings time and end equalization payments. Corey Morgan is a columnist with the Western Standard. Corey says the election on October the 18th is pretty important.
They all are, but this one has so many other issues packed into it. I mean, we don't often get such an opportunity for so many measures of direct democracy. So we have the equalization referendum, we have the Senate election going on here, we have the daylight savings time referendum going on city-wise in Calgary. There's a huge turnover between the mayor and a great number of councillors, and there's a fluoride plebiscite going on. So there's just so many issues packed into it. I'm almost afraid that it chases people away, but it's very important to take part.
Corey Morgan will also discuss the importance of casting a ballot for the Senate nominees. That interview is coming up in the second half of our newscast. Well, in Lethbridge, when you head to the polls, you will also be asked if you support using a ward system to elect city councillors, beginning with the 2025 municipal election, and if the city should approve plans to construct a third bridge prior to 2030 as a municipal capital project priority. Advanced voting continues until 8 p.m. tonight at the ATP Centre on the city's west side, and again from 10 a.m. till 8 p.m. on Saturday. On Election Day, voting will also take place from 10 till 8 at 14 voting stations throughout the city. There will also be 21 designated institutions set up for assisted living facilities, hospitals, and seniors' residences. We'll bring you the unofficial results on our 11 p.m. newscast on Monday night. The results should become official by 12 noon on Friday, October 22nd. The town of Raymond has a new play space for kids to safely enjoy. The new playground was funded through a grant from the West Wind School Division, Alberta Healthy Communities Initiative, and the Family and Community Support Services. The play space cost around $10,000 to construct. $5,000 was also donated for extra services.
So with this playground or play space, we want to make it more natural, have the elements of wood and grass and rock and water and air around us, the wind. So just to bring out those natural elements for children to be able to explore and create with. We have sand, we have rocks, we have all kinds of different things. But the concept in itself to actually get the shovel in the ground has been going for about a year.
The new play space is open to anyone, and kids do not have to be from a specific school to enjoy the fun and games. It appears as though average rents in Canada are trending upward. The average was $1,769, which is an increase of 0.3% over August. That's according to rentals.ca and the National Rent Report from Bullpen Research. Lethbridge finished 32nd out of 35 cities for an average monthly rent in September of $984 for a one-bedroom home and 33rd for average monthly rent for a two-bedroom at $1,133. Calgary finished 28th on the list with an average monthly rent of $1,262 for a one-bedroom and $1,555 for a two-bedroom. That is average increase of about 5.5%. Edmonton was 31st on the list for average monthly rent in September at $1,021 for a one-bedroom and $1,245 for a two-bedroom unit. Red Deer came in dead last of the 35 cities. A one-bedroom home rents out at $950, while a two-bedroom was $1,108. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says Canada must not let its guard down during the pandemic, and that includes the requirement that travelers submit to a test before entering the country, even if they've been double vaxxed.
My priority is to finish the fight against COVID, to allow our economy to continue to reopen, to allow our kids to continue to go to school. And yes, that does mean we need to continue to be prudent and careful. I am not making predictions about the future, and our government has been, throughout the pandemic, thoughtful about working with our public health authorities, working with scientists, working with doctors, and our measures have been flexible, and they have adapted to changing circumstances. And that, of course, will continue to be the situation.
The U.S. announced that it will let fully vaccinated Canadians back across the land border, a plan that does not include testing. A spokesperson for the pharmaceutical company Moderna says people who were vaccinated with their COVID-19 vaccine had a 36% lower rate of breakthrough infections compared to those vaccinated early on in the pandemic. That is one reason why Dr. Jacqueline Miller wants to see approval for a booster used just like Pfizer's.
We observed a 36.4% decrease in the incidence of cases in those who were vaccinated more recently as compared to those who were vaccinated at an earlier time. These findings are consistent with the waning antibodies I previously showed, particularly to the variants of concern. And they're also consistent with the findings of several real-world evidence studies, which have documented reduced vaccine effectiveness to the Delta variant.
3 people are dead after a boat capsized on Reindeer Lake on the Saskatchewan-Manitoba boundary. RCMP say the boat left the northeastern community of Kenney on Monday, but didn't arrive for its destination. A 28-year-old woman was found alive, but the 3 others were missing. A search party from Manitoba later found the bodies of a 50-year-old man, a 42-year-old man, and a 49-year-old woman. None of the victims were wearing life jackets. The Saskatchewan Health Authority is taking over the operation of 5 long-term care homes run by Extended Care. It says the private long-term care provider and the government have reached a mutual agreement to end its contract to operate the facilities with more than 540 residents. The health authority took over managing the facilities following the deadliest outbreak of COVID-19 in the province at Extended Care's Parkside home in Regina late last year. 98% of residents and 132 staff members contracted COVID-19 and 39 residents died from the virus. Nurses in Manitoba finally have a deal after more than 4 years without a collective agreement. The Manitoba Nurses Union announced its members ratified a new contract with the province. The union says the agreement includes a salary increase and protects nurses against excessively long work hours and standby. Government officials welcomed the news of the new agreement and thanked nurses who've worked hard throughout the pandemic. As churches around the world continue to look at ways to minister the hope of the gospel during the pandemic, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association is hosting a series of evangelism summits across the UK. GNA reporter Peter Wooding attended the Liverpool summit and spoke with Christian leaders around the significance of the event.
A special gathering of Christian leaders is bringing believers together for evangelism summits in 4 cities across England, Scotland and Wales. The Billy Graham Evangelistic Association is offering the events to encourage church leaders during these times filled with uncertainty and to support and equip Christians who want to see how they can effectively share the hope of the gospel in their communities. At the second summit, which took place in Liverpool, in the northwest of England, these local church and ministry leaders shared why an event like this is so significant at this time.
People are losing jobs, people have lost relatives. The gospel is good news. So I believe now, like we haven't seen for years, there's a real openness.
To share the gospel, and they have to get equipped and more equipped to evangelize, to share the gospel, because people, they are dying because of pandemic, because of corona, because of the lack of knowing Jesus Christ.
I just believe we should be lifelong evangelists. I was involved in 1984 as a counsellor, and I was on the field of Anfield, and I promised I didn't go just for that. I went to be able to share and lead people to Christ. I was a young Christian then and had just given my life to the Lord and joined the team of the Billy Graham mission that was on in '84. And I've served the Lord ever since with joy, and to be here today is fantastic.
And the final UK Evangelism Summit will take place in London on the 15th of November. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
That is so great to see. Also great to see lots of the sunshine and warmer temperatures we've had in southwestern Alberta, and a gorgeous weekend is shaping up. We'll have full weather details for you in just a moment. We had double-digit temperatures once again here in Lethbridge as we hit the mid-teens, and the mercury will be climbing even further. Jeanette Rocher is back with a complete look at the weather forecast now. Jeanette, it should be a great weekend to head outdoors and enjoy the beautiful fall colors.
Yeah, you're right. It should be a lovely one as we head into the weekend. We're going to be seeing those 20-degree digits again. Looking forward to that. A bit of a windy one this evening, though. We're looking at 50 to 70 kilometer per hour wind gusts from the west. Into tomorrow, a bit windy as well, 40 to 60 K. But there's those 20-degree temperatures I was telling you about. 21 tomorrow, sunshine. And then on Sunday, we're looking at a high of 23. Lots of sunshine as well. Down to 9 degrees on Monday. We're going to feel that compared to that 23 on Sunday. 30% chance of showers as well on Monday. Into Tuesday, mix of sun and cloud, back up to 11, climbing to 16 degrees next Wednesday and 18 degrees into next Thursday. So the average high for this time of year is around 15 degrees. Average low for this time of year, 1 degree. 27 is where we were at back in 1961. It was a hot one. And then we had a chilly one back in 2001. It was minus 13. That was the coldest one on record. 7:37 is when the sun rose this morning, and our sunset this Friday evening, 7:02 p.m. So not quite 12 hours of daylight, a little bit less, but you know, it's fall. What can you say? Lots of rain expected on the west coast. In fact, Vancouver under a rainfall warning. They're looking at 30 millimeters this evening, another 20 to 30 falling tomorrow. Victoria also seeing some rain, 13 degrees the high on the coast, 16 degrees the high in Alberta. The rest of the prairies are Edmonton and Calgary. Calgary looking at a little bit of wind gusts, 20 to 40 K tomorrow. 16 the high in Saskatchewan tomorrow with lots of sunshine. Not too windy though, only 15 kilometer per hour winds. Same thing for Regina, looking at 15 K winds, sunshine, 15 degrees, 14 in Winnipeg under sunny skies, and 20 kilometer per hour winds. not too bad at all. Looking at some rainfall in Toronto, in this whole central area here. Lots of rainfall tonight into tomorrow as well. For Toronto, 16 the high, 18 in Ottawa, 20 the high in Montreal. Both of those cities seeing a risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow as well. 16 in Fredericton tomorrow, rain expected there. Showers expected also in Halifax, 17 degrees the high. Same thing for Charlottetown, rain expected there and showers also expected tomorrow in St. John's with a high of 9 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Enjoy your weekend.
Stats Canada says wholesale sales went up 0.3% in August. Food and beverage sales topped March 2020 levels for the first time since the start of the pandemic. The federal agency says following 2 months of declines, sales increased to $70.3 billion. It says sales of food, beverage, and tobacco products rose 3.8%, while building materials and supplies saw a 2.3% increase. That was partially offset by a 4.2% decline in sales of motor vehicles, parts, and accessories, due in large part to the ongoing shortage of semiconductor chips. The Canadian Real Estate Association says home sales were up 0.9% in September, the first month-over-month gain since last spring. The association says sales came in at the second highest level on record for September at just under 49,000. That was down 17.5% from the same month last year when home sales set a record high for the month. The national average price, however, was up 13.9% from a year earlier. Toyota is being sued by the Nippon Steel Corporation over a patent for technology critical for electric motors. It is a rare case of legal wrangling between Japan's top steelmaker and automaker over intellectual property. Nippon Steel filed the lawsuit in Tokyo District Court, demanding compensation for damages totaling $177 million US. Also named in the lawsuit is Chinese steelmaker Bioshan Iron and Steel. Italy's bankrupt national carrier Alitalia has flown its final flight. The flight from Sardinia to Rome was the last for the 74-year-old carrier, which operated in the red for more than a decade. It will be replaced by a new national carrier, ITA, or Italy Air Transport, which launched today. The EU's Executive Commission has given the go-ahead to a €1.35 billion injection of government funding into the new airline, but the company only plans to hire around a quarter of Alitalia's 10,000 employees. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 108 points on the day to finish at 20,928. The Dow was up 382 points to 35,294. The S&P 500 was up 108 points to 20,928, and the Nasdaq was up 73 points on the day to 14,897. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 97 cents to 82.28 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 28 cents to 541 US. Gold was down 28.25 to 1767.62 US an ounce, and silver was down 21 cents to 23.31 US an ounce. Wheat is at $11.43 per bushel, barley's at $9.14, canola's at $20.79, and corn is at $10.16 per bushel. Live cattle were up 23 cents to $125.98. Feeder cattle were down 85 cents to $157.58, and lean hogs were up 95 cents to $78.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 80.88 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a group called Fight for the Frontline is challenging Alberta Health Services on their decision to implement mandatory vaccinations for frontline workers. Brian Follett and Matthew Halupnicek are first responders in our city who are fighting back against AHS, and the group has sent a warning letter to the head of AHS, Verna Yu, demanding that they be heard. The Alberta Municipal election is coming up on Monday. Now, up next, we chat with the Western Standard columnist Corey Morgan about some of the big items that you'll be voting on. Stay tuned. The Alberta Municipal election is coming up. I care about it. My family cares about it. But do you think most Albertans actually care to vote? Who's going to be on the next city or town council? Joining me now to discuss the importance of civic elections is Corey Morgan, a columnist with the Western Standard magazine. Corey, welcome to Bridge City News.
Great, thanks for having me on.
First of all, share with our viewers a little bit about what Western Standard is all about and your approach to covering the news of the day.
Certainly, we're an online publication. We were initially, well, we're what came about from the old Alberta Report, for some people who may remember that, from the Byfields. That evolved into Report magazine, and then the Western Standard under Ezra Levant. then it got shelved for about 6 or 7 years, and Derek Fildebrand and some others kind of rejuvenated it and brought back online 2 years ago. And it's been doing very well. It's a Western focused publication, much like the old magazine, and definitely approaching things from a conservative viewpoint.
So, Corey, why do you feel that this particular round of municipal elections is so vital for our province?
Yeah, well, they all are, but this one has so many other issues packed into it. I mean, we don't often get such an opportunity for so many measures of direct democracy. So we have the equalization referendum, we have the Senate election going on here, we have the daylight savings time referendum going on city-wise in Calgary. There's a huge turnover between the mayor and a great number of councillors, and there's a fluoride plebiscite going on. So there's just so many issues packed into it. I'm almost afraid that it chases people away, but it's very important to take part.
Now, you live just outside of Calgary and Prentice. You're actually joining us from Canmore. Love that area, God's country. I'm a big fan of the mountains here, especially with Waterton not too far outside of our back door here in Lethbridge. But let's talk a bit about Calgary. Who are some of the frontrunners right now with Naheed Nenshi stepping down?
Yeah, well, it appears the top three frontrunners are Jody Gondek, Jeremy Farkas, and Jeff Davison. And all three of them were former city councillors, which shows, and there's 27 candidates, but those are the only three that are breaking double-digit support. Because name recognition is just so critical in these municipal elections. And as much as there might be some very good candidates back there in the pack, it's just hard to grab traction if you don't have that established track record on city council like the others. So the three incumbent members who decided to go throw their hats in for mayor are the top three running right now.
You know, it's interesting you talk about name recognition. It's the same thing here in Lethbridge with Blaine Hagan, who's a current city councillor running for mayor, and Bridget Mearns, who's a two-time former councillor, also running here. And they're the two front runners here in Lethbridge as well so far. There's also Stephen Mogden, who is a very popular lawyer in our city too, so we'll see what happens. Now, Corey, why should people really care about municipal issues? What kinds of things are we talking about that will have a severe impact on individuals and business owners?
Yeah, well, people underestimate. I mean, that's the closest level of government to you. Ironically and unfortunately, citizens are prone not to paying as close attention to it as the bigger levels of government, such as provincial and federal, perhaps because you see more eye-catching things like international affairs and large domestic policies. But the taxes, the services, the things that are happening close to you really impact your local businesses, your local employment, your standard of living, your neighbors, your households. It's really critical, and people just sometimes take it for granted, I guess you could say. But it's a very, very important that they pay attention to these and constantly putting incumbents back in. I mean, perhaps they've been doing a good job, but it also shows that they can get away with a lot because people aren't necessarily paying attention to what's happening.
Yeah, you talk about that name recognition. It's like, well, this is the only name I recognize. I'm voting for that woman or that man again, right? Now, you know, this could have a huge impact, this municipal election, on our municipal economies, how each city handles the next waves of COVID-19, either implementing more strict lockdowns or letting businesses function more freely. Your thoughts?
Well, yes, and Calgary in particular, I mean, that's almost half of Alberta's population is jammed into the Calgary area. And Calgary's downtown is hollowed out. There is a crisis going on in that city right now. The official vacancy rate in downtown office buildings is over 30%, which is already catastrophic. The real vacancy rate is probably closer to 50. A lot of that space is leased by companies, but there's just nobody in it, and they're just sitting on it. And the city has to figure out a way to deal with this donut of a city they're building in a sense right now. Taxation policy has always become very reliant on, I guess you'd say, the easy money of oil company tenants and people in the downtown core, and those just aren't there anymore. So they really need some new, in my view, some new faces in, and they're going to get them, but ones who have a good vision on how we're going to come at things differently, bring in new enterprise, bring in fresh ideas to try and rejuvenate that crumbling downtown, because it's such a colossal waste right now.
Yeah, high vacancy rate. You're absolutely right. Let's talk about Calgary potentially reinventing itself instead of just all about the oil and gas and the energy sector. Is there a way that Cowtown, my hometown, can do that?
There definitely is. I mean, it's a great, beautiful city with the Rocky Mountains on our doorstep, of course. You know, as a place to locate a business or a company, it has a lot of things to attract people in. They have to maintain a business-friendly climate, though. And I mean, we can diversify. There are other companies, whether it's in the tech industries or pharmaceutical development, a great many things. And we have a lot of skilled engineers and administrators who unfortunately may have lost work with the energy boom gone away, but they're still there and and they have transferable skills. So if we reach out and if we maintain, though, that welcoming pro-business attitude, we can bring them in. But Calgary's had a bit of a difficulty with the municipal government clashing with business, and it hasn't really been a business focus. So we're kind of hoping that there will be a more welcoming atmosphere with the new council and mayor, whoever it may be, when they come in soon.
Now, Corey, any thoughts as to why we tend to see a much lower voter turnout for municipal elections as compared to both provincial and federal elections?
I hate to say it, but some of it's just that the issues are a little bit boring. Garbage collection, road construction, potholes. But these are still multi-billion-dollar issues. Those people who are issuing development permits or dealing with residential zoning. Again, it sounds so dry, but it is so very, very important. In this time around, I'm a little bit fearful just because we're coming right on the heels of a federal election. Right. So there could be some voter fatigue. People have seen so much politics in the last month. They just want to say, throw their hands up. It's been a challenging 2 years as it is. The last thing I want to do is listen to a bunch more politicians yammering at my ears for another month. But hopefully they see through that and still realize how important it is. Just get it one more time, and then we can settle in for the winter.
And all of those road signs, all of the election signs, all the way up and down the roads, oh my word, there are thousands of them, right? Sometimes you try to turn a corner, you can't see the other vehicle because all these election signs. Some are bigger, smaller, whatever the case. So it'd be nice to see those election signs finally cleaned up as well. Now, Corey, this election also gives us an opportunity to cast a ballot for Senate nominees we talked a little bit about earlier. Some people will likely see them as a waste of time because there's a good chance Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I'm just going to appoint this one, like I did when I grabbed the Banff mayor, right? And appointed that person as senator. So why should we even bother voting for a senator in waiting anyway? Why should we even bother?
Yeah, well, it's a point of principle, and it is, for people who haven't followed Alberta history, it's been kind of almost a long-standing tradition from back when we put Stan Waters in back at the end of the 80s, and he did manage to get into Senate. People said it was a waste of time that time. A couple other senators, Doug Black, I believe Burt Brown got appointed through Senate election processes. All of them had to wait a while before they got in, so perhaps Prime Minister Trudeau, it's very unlikely he would put them in. But he's not going to be our prime minister forever, even if it may feel like it. And the next prime minister may be more receptive to choosing those who we've chosen. And I mean, there's nothing to lose. You're going in to cast your ballot. Pick the best person you can for yourself, and they may end up there representing you. It also gives us just more of a moral high ground to stand on when we say, look, we're tired of this archaic system where senators are appointed for political reasons. We'd like you to recognize our choice. So we have a stronger voice in that way.
Now, Corey, we also have an opportunity to vote on a couple of provincial referendums, one being daylight savings time and the other on keeping or ending equalization payments. Again, this is, of course, is not binding by the federal government in Ottawa anyway. So why should we even bother casting a vote in that regard too?
And it's much like with the Senate election. At least it's an opportunity for us to express ourselves very solidly. So it's not a newspaper poll, it's not a publication, it's not an online poll. Will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Albertans will have said they are not happy, or perhaps they are happy with the status quo with equalization, which should carry some weight. And it gives Premier Kenney or future premiers something to go to Ottawa with and say, look, this isn't working for our citizens. They're upset with this. Let's start realistically talking about reform. It's a way to get the ball in motion, at least. The other alternative is to do nothing. And that I don't think most Albertans feel is acceptable. So it might feel futile, but it is an effort, and it can lead to more changes, hopefully, down the road.
What's interesting, too, is I believe Jason Kenney, when he was part of the Harper cabinet, he was the one that was involved with the initial equalization to begin with. So it's kind of ironic now that he's going to go back to Ottawa saying, hey, this doesn't work for us anymore, right? This doesn't work for Albertans. Now, Corey, there's also the vote on whether to stay with the current practice of switching over every fall from daylight savings time back to standard time, or permanently staying with daylight savings time. Some say it's not a big issue one way or the other, but others believe it's something that can actually affect our health, and now we potentially interact with other provinces and states which have different time zones.
Yeah, and that one actually, I was kind of slid under the radar. I wasn't paying much attention to it. I thought that most people were pretty ambivalent to it, but it's getting actually a bit heated. Some people are quite concerned. I've got a feeling from what I'm hearing that this one's going to fail. I think maybe people want to move away from changing the clocks twice a year, but going to the straight time that this is offering right now isn't what they want to do. But I don't know. We seem to be crippled with the indecision when it comes to changing the clocks with that. And then this referendum might not be the one where we decide to break away from the status quo. But it'll be interesting exercise to watch and see what Albertans choose out of it.
Now, with this municipal election as well, we're going to be casting a ballot for school trustees, public and separate. Let's talk about the importance of educating ourselves and finding out who these trustees are before we place an X next to their name.
It's absolutely critical. I mean, these are the people who are going to represent you towards the school boards and the schools themselves. And these are the schools that are educating your children. And that's as precious a commodity as we have. So there's your opportunity to have that representation in there. And I've got to admit, my kids are out of school and graduated. Before I go out to vote on Monday, I'm going to have to go out and see who the candidates are. I haven't paid close attention, and whoever looks best to me at that point is who I'll choose. But as I said, it's that irony of the government that's so important to you and so close to you, yet we pay the least attention to it. And it's really important because some of these trustees have some very different visions on what they'd like to see in the education system. And if you don't put your voice forward now, you might have somebody out there speaking on behalf of you for your kid's future that doesn't really actually represent you at all.
So, Corey, any final thoughts on why Albertans should bother voting at the municipal election on Monday?
I guess it's almost cliche, but it's a right that we have. It's such a fantastic one. I mean, democracy is such a great system, as many hiccups and flaws as it has, and we should never take it for granted. Even if they feel like minor issues, we've got the chance to get out there and make our voice heard in it, and it doesn't take that long and it's not that hard. So but go register that vote, and then you can complain about the outcome for 4 more years after that.
Every vote counts. Corey Morgan is a columnist with the Western Standard magazine. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
All right, thank you.
One of the leading killers for North Americans is still heart disease and stroke. How do we best protect ourselves and our families to help us enjoy healthier and longer lives? Dr. Dennis Modry may have a few suggestions for us. Dr. Modry is a pioneer of open heart surgery in Alberta. He implemented Western Canada's first heart and lung transplantation program. He also served on numerous hospital committees and successive Alberta Conservative government finance committees. He's also been a director of several public companies and has been a member of the editorial board of the Journal of the Heart and Lung Transplantation. Dr. Modry, that's quite an introduction, and welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Now, Dr. Modry, with your expertise in heart and lung health, why do you think nurses are reporting to us here at Bridge City News that they're seeing an increase in heart and lung issues from certain people who have received the mRNA vaccine?
Well, that's a very good question. We know, for example, that individuals, particularly younger individuals, males in particular, have been prone to develop a form of myocarditis and pericarditis. And this has been somewhat worrisome. And of course, it's changed the perspective that the FDA and the NIH have had with respect to the implication or the implementation of these vaccines for younger people. And I think it's part of the reason why, as well, that a lot of younger people have been shying away from becoming vaccinated because they are aware of this particular problem, particularly in younger people.
Is it more common than we realize, or is it like maybe 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 50,000?
Well, I think you can look on the CDC website, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and that gives you some sense of the scale of the problem. But part of the difficulty is, in terms of answering that question accurately, is that there's no mandate for reporting adverse events from the vaccine. So we're just guessing in terms of the scale of the problem. But suffice to say that the fact that it is being reported at all is, number one, worrisome, and 2, dissuasive for younger people in particular to become vaccinated with any of the COVID-19 vaccines, particularly Moderna right now, I expect.
Now, the Centers for Disease Control and Protection in the United States says if a person is immune to measles, that person should not receive a vaccination for measles. Is the same true for other diseases or viruses such as COVID-19?
Well, I believe that to be the case. I mean, if you've been exposed to COVID-19 already and you've survived it, and obviously the probabilities of surviving are nearly 100% for most categories, particularly under 70. If you've been already exposed, we know from history in terms of other people being infected with various viruses, that the immunity that is generated is extremely robust and long-lasting. And the evidence isn't out there yet to prove that if you've had COVID-19, that you should subject yourself to becoming vaccinated with the potential risks associated with being vaccinated, notwithstanding death. And I might just say that, you know, it's amazing to me to think that in the last 30 years, taking deaths from all vaccines being in the order of 3,000, and here we are just with COVID-19. And you can look at the CDC website and you'll see that just in the US alone, there's 16,000 deaths. Well, previously, you know, would there be 25 or 50 deaths that would occur from a vaccine? The FDA would stop the continuation of using that vaccine. But here we are with over 16,000 deaths in the US and many more around the world. And we're just piling on with even more and more vaccines and now boosters. Where it all ends, who knows? But I suspect that what we're seeing in Israel and in other areas, that there's going to be an increasing amount of people who are vaccinated, not just who get COVID-19 or a variant of it, but I'm worried that there may well be increasing numbers of deaths in people who have been vaccinated who are then exposed to a variant. Whereas if you hadn't been vaccinated, you would have more broad-based immunity because simply when you've had COVID-19, you develop antibody to the entire virus, as opposed just to the spike protein, which is engendered by the various vaccines. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. And I hope I'm wrong. And I hope that the very esteemed virologists around the world are wrong, that there will be many more deaths in the vaccinated than in the unvaccinated.
Dr. Madry, we're receiving reports here at the station that certain AHS staff are refusing the COVID-19 vaccine and some are even quitting as a result. So how will the health authority handle a situation like this? I mean, we already have a shortage of doctors and nurses here in our province.
Well, that's an incredibly important question, but let me answer it by, first of all, giving you a little bit of background. Many of those healthcare workers who I've worked with for 30 years, they were there on the front line, not being vaccinated. Many of them may have developed COVID and didn't even know it because a lot of them were young and healthy. So they were there on the front line, and now they're being told that unless they get a vaccine for which they have legitimate concerns about with respect to myocarditis, death, clot formation, central venous thrombosis, splanchnic venous thrombosis, et cetera, Bell's palsy, and all kinds of other potential problems. And now they're being told that they have to be vaccinated when they've worked for 18 months without being vaccinated. It really doesn't make any sense. And to think that, the government would mandate that they have to be vaccinated or they're going to be fired, I think is an egregious step in the wrong direction. And I think it breaches every thought of normality and morality and individual rights. So I think it's a colossal error and it's a backward step, and it's only going to create further problems, further delays in people accessing the healthcare system. As you probably know, Hal, one of the chief problems of our Canadian healthcare system, the way it's constructed under the Canada Health Act, is the problem of waiting to access the healthcare system. This is just going to make it a whole lot worse for many people who need to access it. They're going to die before they get in the system. It's a terrible, terrible policy, and it should be rescinded.
So, Dr. Modry, with everything that's transpired, do you think this could potentially lead to even more private health care?
That's an extremely excellent question. And, we already have a great deal of private health care now. But I could see, for example, particularly on the reservations, for example, which is immune to whether or not you have public health care or private health care. And on the reservations, you can set up private health care. I could certainly see this being something that could move forward in a fairly rapid fashion. However, to build hospitals and really to build an infrastructure, it would take a number of years and a lot of money. But I certainly think that it is possible. And I rather expect that many of the people who are going to be offloaded from the healthcare system because of government policy, we're going to be looking for employment in private clinics and surgery centers and that sort of thing.
So, Dr. Modry, why do you think that some of the numbers Alberta Health is posting when it comes to COVID-19 deaths and maybe some of the numbers of the ICU beds, the shortages of beds, may differ from what we're actually hearing from certain frontline workers?
Sure, those are two important questions. The first question is that many of the deaths that have occurred, in fact, probably in order of 90 to 95% of the deaths that have occurred did not occur as a result of COVID-19. They occurred as a result of the underlying condition. And the reason we know that, for example, is that the PCR test that was used to make those diagnoses is notoriously wrong, particularly at cycle thresholds over 30. And they were running cycle thresholds 35 to 45. So the diagnosis of COVID-19, for one thing, was completely erroneous. So, and when you look at it from another perspective, the average age of death for individuals with COVID-19 is 82. The average age of death in the general population is 81. So you could interpret from that you have an advantage, a life expectancy advantage by having COVID-19. So it's ridiculous to think that COVID-19 has been the cause of death, but it has been the cause of the lockdowns, and the lockdowns itself has caused many more deaths. Now, the issue of ICU beds and hospital beds, the rubber meets the road in the ICU. When this all started 18 months ago or so, the ICU capacity in the province was 272 beds. And in roughly June of 2020, excuse me, the Premier came out and said that we can ramp up to 1,081 beds. Now, he didn't do that. And he should have been smarter. I mean, he has been told by myself and others that the solution to handling this problem without having lockdowns was to simply double the ICU capacity. And there was plenty of opportunity to do that, which solves two problems. And one of the problems is to handle any surge from purported COVID-19 patients. The second is to solve the chronic problem that exists within the general healthcare system, and that's access and long waiting lists. So you double the ICU capacity. He could have won on both fronts, but he didn't do it. And that's a failure of leadership, in my opinion. And mainly because, like I say, he's been told. So he knows that. And it's a failure of leadership by AHS as well.
Now, Dr. Modry, last December, you penned an open letter to Premier Jason Kenney calling for an end to all public health measures. Now, why did you, and what was the Premier's response?
Well, at the time, I was primarily focused on lockdowns because we already knew the evidence had been mounting. And over the course of between October and November, mid-November, there were several papers that were published, not the least of which was the Great Barrington Declaration, authored by luminaries from Stanford, Oxford, and Harvard, that pointed out that lockdowns do more harm than good. So my focus was to provide a counter narrative to what he was getting from Dr. Hinshaw, and with evidence. And so every statement that I made in that December 11th, 2020 letter provided the background document for him to review. Now, he did respond, but he implemented a lockdown anyhow, despite the fact that he had said earlier in the early summer of 2020 that he made a mistake and he wouldn't do that again. So he then did respond to my letter 3 months later in March. And his response demonstrated a complete lack of understanding the science, because he did not at all respond to any of the scientific arguments that I advanced with the evidence. But what he did do is he said that we couldn't overwhelm the healthcare system, which I had already pointed out to him. And I reminded him in that article that the solution was not to lock down all of society. The solution was to increase ICU capacity and to look after the vulnerable. Really, that's all that needed to happen. All you've got to do is look at what happened in Sweden. And, you know, Sweden hasn't ruined their economy. They've managed to get through all of this without masks, without lockdowns, without social distancing. And it tells you a lot when you look at the outcomes from Sweden.
The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta says since you're not currently a practicing physician, they fully support Dr. Dean Hinshaw, who they say is our current medical officer of health, which is the truth. Now, they say your specialization was in surgery and not in public health. How do you respond to that?
Oh, that's easy for me to respond. The key issue there is to understand the science. And throughout my career, you have to remember that I was also the director of the cardiovascular intensive care unit. As such, I needed to be knowledgeable with respect to the prevention and treatment of infection. More than that, when I trained at Stanford, one of the years that I trained at Stanford was in immunology with one of the world's leading immunologists. And why that was relevant, because to be the director of the heart and lung transplant program, and people who have been transplanted are immunocompromised because of the immunosuppressive drugs that we give them, they are also more prone to infections of all types: bacterial, viral, rickettsial, protozoal, tuberculous, etc. So again, I needed to be knowledgeable with respect to the prevention and treatment of infection in those patients as well. So for me, it was extremely easy to read the science that was out there. And the problem with Dr. Hinshaw and AHS is that they claim to have looked at the counter narrative, but they have been unwilling totally to actually have a frank discussion in a roundtable discussion, say with government caucus members, by individuals who do have knowledge and can provide evidence to counter the narrative. But you also have to ask the question, why is this occurring? Why has government and health authorities gone down this particular rabbit hole of insisting that everybody be vaccinated and all of these other mandates? And one of the things that I think it's worthwhile thinking about, a lot of people on the conspiracy theorist end of things talk about, well, this is all about control, et cetera. And maybe part of that is true. But really, the bottom line is the bottom line. Follow the money. The pharmaceutical industrial government complex is massive. Trillions of dollars are at stake. You know, when you listen to Fauci speak, for example, he has lamented the fact that annual vaccinations for seasonal flu are declining because people feel as though, what's the point? The virus mutates, I can fight it off myself. So here was an opportunity to actually generate real wealth for a selected group of individuals. And I can't help but think when you follow the money, there is a component of this. Now, one of the things that's really important as well is that just as society is more divided now than I've ever seen in my life on so many other things, so is the medical community. And many people in the medical community I know, and they would like to speak out, but they know that they're going to lose as a physician, they're going to lose their privileges, or they may lose their license from the college. For me, it's easy to speak out because when I retired after 30 years of practice, I'm fundamentally immune to be able to speak out. Some courageous physicians have spoken out, but some of them have already lost their licenses or their hospital privileges. So that's a lesson for them.
Dr. Dennis Maudry is a pioneer of open heart surgery in our province. He also served on numerous hospital committees and is a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Heart and Lung Transplantation. Thanks for joining us today from Edmonton, Doctor.
My pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.